Reading book on pausing and institutions. Written by me, Eric Wadell. First draft, February 2026. Chapter 6. ACUTE Situation. When we are caught off guard, startled, or suddenly approached. Pausing, institutions, and ACUTE. Acute situations are unpleasant and they make us nervous to think about. None of us likes to be caught off guard, losing all or at least a lot of our control in but a split second. We may go to great lengths planning and taking precautions in order for us to minimize the risk of being put in any acute situations. But still, these kinds of situations have a tendency to find us nonetheless. They are troublesome, like that. 40,000 years ago, acute situations were about crude survival in a time when we were exposed to the grounded mortality of our lives. For example, we were ambushed by wild animals. Fierce weather conditions forced us to go into hiding. Rough nature injured our body and made it vulnerable to sickness and disease. Food and water supplies suddenly became scarce from time to time. Serious competition within our tribe made us fight for our lives with our peers. Frequent warfare broke out with the neighbouring enemy tribes. And our housing were at times destroyed, so we had to relocate. These are some examples of very real acute situations that we had to deal with. So the institutions of that time needed to be designed in accordance with those challenges. In our modern days, the acute situations that we face are in some ways different, but also in other ways the same. Our modern days examples also have to do with the same themes, like housing, basic resources, health, and social status. But they come in new forms in accordance with our modern day institutions. For example, debt slavery, social isolation, propaganda, high technological weapons of modern warfare. Surveillance. Intergroup frictions. Criminal networks. Narcotics. Scamming. And also mass-produced everyday social spaces and things. These are some examples creating modern acute situations. And we will not dwell on the burdens they place on us here in this text, but rather affirm ourselves in that we are dealing with just as serious acute situations today as people did 40,000 years ago. Only that our modern examples in many cases are man-made and not nature-made. Pausing in modern acute situations allows us to get in touch not only with the institutions of today, but also with the institutions of old. It would seem that our physiological reactions to acute situations have changed little, if at all, from 40,000 years ago. So in our bodily reactions, our institutions might have changed, but the existential threats have not. How is it any different to us and to our institutions, though, that most acute challenges today are man-made and not nature-made? Pausing in our acute situation. Pausing in an acute situation is about developing a sense of judging authority. And more specifically, a sense of split-second judging the relative authorities in the situation at hand. When we are caught off guard, startled or suddenly approached, we will momentarily lose control. And at that moment, our practice is to pause for a split second or two and acknowledge that we did in fact lose control. If we do not acknowledge this temporary defeat, we will not be able to regain our control, but instead have the lost control snowball on us and become more of a problem to us than was originally necessary. So, pausing in an acute situation is about acknowledging the frequent small but inevitable defeats in life. When we can do that, damage done unto us will be reduced down to more acceptable levels. Whenever we are caught off guard, startled, or suddenly approached, we pause and make a split-second judgment as to what are the perceived authorities in the given situation. Note here that we are not dealing with real authorities, but with perceived authorities. Because in an acute situation, the outcome is not affected by real power, but by perceived power. Our job is to develop solid improvisational skills out of this sense of judging perceived relative authorities. In an acute situation, you will have claims that you would like to make. There will be a certain space that you would like to claim, as well as things to claim, and also other people to claim. In the same acute situation, there will also be other people having their own sets of claims to spaces, things, and people. Whenever your claims contradict the claims of another person, sudden turns of events become more likely to happen. Also, whenever people involved have too much physiological tension stored up in their bodies, sudden releases are likely to occur. It is like a spring being wound up, ready to snap. Pausing in acute situations is in large part about reconnecting with our instinctual roots. Since the situations in themselves must be resolved in but a split second, we do not have the time to depend on any slow, higher critical thinking of ours, but instead we must rely on quick intuition. So, pausing here is about us frequently reconnecting with our animal roots and developing the ability to gauge the situation with instinctual eyes. When we come across a person where the tension is high, we look each other in the eye and just know what to do. But we only know what to do because we have practiced at it again and again. Pausing in acute situations is hard work like that. There is no shortcut to developing such a solid sense of judging relative perceived authorities. All that we can do is to reconnect with our intuition as often as we have the ambition and energy to. Dual loyalty to institutions and acute. We have found that there are some timeless themes behind acute situations. Housing, basic resources, health, and social status. 40,000 years ago, these themes expressed themselves in relatively crude versions, close to nature. Today, these themes many times express themselves in man-made, appropriated versions, further away from nature. Today, the first three of the four themes, which were housing, basic resources, and health are logistically not as challenging to people in the Western world as they were 40,000 years ago. Today, in our Western world, the fourth theme, however, social status, has arguably taken on a more prominent role in our acute situations. Today, most of the sudden and startling situations are arguably due to reasons of social status. This seems to be true for most conflicts today. Our main areas of anxiety or concern is seldom housing, basic resources, or health, with old age being an important exception here, however. But instead, we mainly worry about what other people will think or say about us, or what role in the group we may or may not have. Thus, in our modern days, the concern we traditionally have felt about housing, basic resources, or health, we now arguably instead project on the sole area of social status. Our bodies have changed little, if at all, in these past 40,000 years, so they will still expect the same amount of existential anxiety. But in our modern days, our bodies will project most of its internal worry solely on its social status. In our modern days, most of our worries is about man-made problems like this. The dynamics institutions of today, when it comes to acute situations, is thus about man-made problems. And we will react to these man-made problems as if they were natural threats to our survival. In one sense, they are real threats to our survival, since our groupthink makes the problems real. And in another sense, they are not really natural threats to our survival, but only arbitrary and debatable. Our dual loyalty in this context is then that we on the one hand wish to treat our modern institutions as if they were existentially necessary, even though they many times are not. We may call this our conventional loyalty. On the other hand, we wish to reconnect with the nature-made existential challenges of 40,000 years ago. We may call this our radical loyalty. To use a well-known mythological example illustrating these two loyalties, in the Iliad by Homer, Odysseus is masterful at navigating conventional loyalty, and Achilles is equally masterful but at navigating radical loyalty. Under the previous subheading, we found our goal in acute situations to be to develop a solid sense of judging relative authorities And this is what we want to do with our dual loyalty. In any given acute situation, we want to judge the relative authorities between the man-made conventional institutions of today, on the one hand, and the nature-made existential threats that our bodies still expect out of life, on the other hand. Simplifying all of this slow and somewhat technical reasoning into a simple, quick rule of thumb. When we come across an acute situation, we pause and ask ourselves if the man-made institution at hand is the real existential threat, or if it is in fact possible to debate or negotiate. We ask ourselves, does this certain acute situation feel negotiable in the pit of my stomach? If yes, then it might be more arbitrary than we initially thought it to be. Also, if yes, then our bodies might actually instead be longing for a more nature-made alternative institution than the one we currently have in front of us. But if not, then the situation at hand demands our full attention and respect. We pause and find our dual loyalty when it comes to our acute situation to be our old emotional loyalty, the radical nature-made authority, and our new intellectual loyalty being our conventional man-made authority. Now we move on to our long-term situation.